Hello, you found why we are Christians. My name is Kent Philpott. I'm the pastor of Miller Avenue Baptist Church in Mill Valley, California. But we're reaching out all the way, about halfway around the world, to South Wales. We're talking with Michael Thomas. He's smiling right now. Welcome, Michael. Thanks for being on.
Thank you, Ken, for having me. It's a pleasure to be a guest.
Well, we're going to go through this. This is the first of two programs, and
Okay.
you were born in South Wales.
I was born in a little town called Kidwelly in
Kidwelly.
South Wales. Yeah.
And so you consider yourself Welsh, but I think you say you're Welsh Irish.
Yeah, my mother's side of the family were originally Irish. Her maiden name was Mitchell, but my father was very Welsh. His first language was Welsh.
Okay.
So yeah.
And you say here that you're a Celt. C-E-L-T. A Celt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There are so many of us about, we're everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah, the Celtic nations, the Scots and the Irish and the Welsh and the Cornish.
Okay. Now, the last name Thomas, does that go back to the Apostle Thomas? The origin
Oh,
of
I
that name?
wish. Oh, I wish. I wish. I like a man who asks questions, so the Apostle Thomas would suit me.
Okay. Now, in the form that you filled out for me, Michael, you said that you never went to college.
No,
Never went to college, but you say you're a lifelong learner, and
oh yeah, yeah.
well, I can see the background is all those books back there.
Yeah, I tell you what, Kent, leaders are readers. If you don't read, you'll always be mediocre. You've got to read. You've got to expose yourself to what other people are saying. And there are always people who know better than me.
Okay. Um, Tell us a little bit about your growing up. You're growing up in your family. A little bit about that.
We were poor. I was born in 1953, and there were 5 children, and so 7 of us around the table, and there wasn't a lot to go around, but it was happy. And we used to. There was a castle. There is a castle in the town where I come from, and that was really my playground. We used to go in there even when we weren't supposed to, even when the castle was closed. We'd find a way in and we'd play in the castle. And it was a really good time when I was a kid. It really was a very nice time.
Did you do any sports? Did you play any
No,
sports?
I was never sports minded. I just don't know. I missed that. I look back now and I wish I paid more attention to that. But I was always very bookish, you see.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So where did we use the word high school, but what do
Yeah.
when your last years, what do
Well, we call it a secondary school. It's also high school.
Okay.
My formal education ended at the age of 15.
Okay. All right. Um,
Yeah.
Now, were your when you were a kid, your parents, did you go to any kind of church, anything like that?
No, no. We were my family wouldn't thank me for saying this, but we weren't a Christian home in the way you and I would understand that. We were good people, good enough, I suppose, but we didn't go to chapel or church. And when I was a kid, just like everybody else, I was sent to Sunday school. But you see, I spoke English, and the Sunday school was in Welsh, and they made no concessions.
Now,
So
wait a minute, Michael.
I,
Now, I want to. What you just said was, you spoke English,
English, yeah,
but the church you went to, they spoke Welsh.
yeah, everything was in Welsh, and I didn't speak Welsh. And I always say that in Wales, you're Welsh first, you're nonconformist second, and you're Christian third.
Okay.
That's kind of, for a lot of people, it's like that, you know. It's if you don't speak Welsh, you're not going to get in. And
Okay.
I didn't understand what they were teaching me, but there we go.
Okay. This was what kind of a church was it?
It was a Welsh Calvinistic Methodist Church.
Welsh Calvinist
Calvinistic Methodist
Methodist Church.
Church. Yeah. And
Wow.
the preacher, Mr. Jones, was a very kind man.
Okay.
He was well loved in the town, and we thought a lot of him, but not well enough to go to chapel regularly.
Okay. I've never heard of that denomination, but
Oh, it's peculiar to this part of the world.
okay.
It's peculiar to this part of the world, yeah.
Okay. Now, I know that. What was your early concepts about what life was like, who you thought God was like, perhaps?
Well, I didn't have a framework for that in my life. I found that when I was growing up and when I was a teenager, I started asking the questions that people do ask, but there seemed to be nobody with answers. And I think I probably imagined God as being stern. I believed he was there, but it never occurred to me that he could be a friend of mine.
Okay. So one thing that you said here, that when you were 14 years old, you were at what you call a town center church.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that
yeah.
Wesleyan Calvinist church?
No, it was I don't know what denomination it was. It was a Saturday afternoon in the big town about 10 miles from where I lived. I was wandering about and I saw this thing going on. I walked in and I sat at the back, and I was by 14 I was asking questions, but all they had was a bicycle. This guy pulled on a bicycle and he'd finished whatever he was saying. And he said, the first young man or woman to come up and give their heart to Jesus will get this new bicycle. And it was a nice bicycle. It really was. And I was tempted, but it just seemed wrong somehow, you know? So I walked out again.
I recall a time I was with a friend and at a restaurant, and he said to the guy behind the counter, he said, "Squeeze my hand and accept Jesus." Oh,
That is great. That's great. What response did he get?
what's that?
What reaction did he get?
Well, I don't know, but that was popular,
Yeah,
and especially dealing with kids,
yeah,
and
yeah.
also, of course, it does is produce a false conversion, a very sad thing. Now,
Yeah, that's right.
so now you have a little phrase here, and I'm just going to read the sentence, Michael, and help me with it, because it says a lot of that sort of thing went on in those days. Just consider the scandal of the Mormon baseball baptisms. The Mormon baseball baptisms. Now, what is that?
Well, back in the day, Mormon missionaries would come out, usually from Utah, and they would form local baseball teams. They would introduce the youngsters, the children, to baseball, the children in the neighborhood. But then they would say to them, well, you can't be on the team unless you're baptized.
As a Mormon.
As a Mormon. So the child would go home with a consent form for the parents. The parents thought it was just about joining a baseball team, so they would sign it, and then the children would be baptized.
Into the Mormon church, yeah.
Into the Mormon church, yeah. It was a great scandal back in the 50s and 60s. Yeah, and a lot of people, they lost a lot of people because these children grew up realize what had been done to them, and they just walked away from it.
Sure. Wow.
Yeah.
Now, but you became a Mormon,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
your wife Ann did as well.
Yeah, she became a Mormon. She was in London when that happened. And we hadn't met. And when I became a Mormon, it was because two missionaries approached me on the street and they offered to answer the questions that I had. And so I started taking missionary lessons with them. And I met my wife Ann through the church, through the Mormon Church, when she moved down to where I live now, Swansea, in South Wales. And we met through the Mormon Church. So some good came of it, Kent.
Okay. And so you never went as a Mormon missionary?
No. It wasn't something that I kind of missed that boat, really. Within a year of becoming a Mormon, I'd met Anne, and then we settled down. We married and settled down. We went to the temple, started a family.
Okay.
But I liked the answers they were giving. It was an exciting story. It's important to understand that it's a very exciting story they tell, and it's quite exotic. You know, for a lot of people, it looks like a way out. If you feel you're stuck in a rut, well, here's an exciting story. These guys with American accents, and it is very attractive.
So you were in the Mormon Church for 14 years.
Yeah, I
And
was.
and your wife Ann for 18, you say.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you say here, after 14 years as a Mormon, you say your wife and you turned to a Christian friend for help. Tell us about that, Michael.
Yeah. Well, you know, everything in a cult is good until it isn't. It all works until it doesn't, and it wasn't working for us. And I couldn't understand why we were trying hard, but we didn't seem to be getting anywhere in our walk, in our faith. And you don't complain when you're in a cult. You don't go and ask those kinds of questions. But we knew a man, John Tancock. And so we turned to him and said, look, we just got questions. We just have these questions. Would you sit with us and talk to us? And he came over on a Saturday morning and he listened to what we had to say. And he'd talked to us before, and he'd been dealing with cults since he was about 16 years of age. And then he said, why don't you come to church in the morning with me and see for yourself? And I thought that was so impressive to be able to say of your church, why don't you come and see for yourself? So I went on the Sunday morning because I didn't want my children and my wife to be exposed to this because it might be a cult. So I went along, and when I went home, I said to her, Anne, you've got to come and see these people. It's the most amazing thing. They really love the Lord. And then she came along on a Sunday evening, and about 15 minutes into that Sunday evening meeting, my wife fled the building. And I ran out after, we didn't know anybody except John. And I ran out after her, and one of the ladies in the church came out, and she was crying. And my first thought was, what have I done? And we asked her what's wrong. And she said, there's nothing wrong. It's just too much. It's just too wonderful. And so she dried her tears. We went back in and we began to learn what it is to truly worship God. It was a wonderful experience.
Wow. So that's pretty much the beginning of your being a follower of Jesus at that point, Michael?
That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
And so how did the Mormon folks that you knew, how did they react to that?
Well, you need to understand, these were good people. They were friends of ours. We had a high regard for them. And I invited the Mormon bishop to come over so we could talk these things through. And he didn't have any answers. And what he said to us was, you haven't been to the temple recently. You're not paying a full tithing. You've missed church for a couple of weeks. And as he went through this list, the scales began to fall from my eyes, and I realized the difference between what we had just experienced in a Christian church and Mormonism. It was all works. And it became very clear why it didn't work. Because you can't work your way to heaven. You have to come to the cross. You have to kneel at the foot of the cross and repent and accept that only Jesus can do it. And his conversation with us, and honestly, Kent, I wish it hadn't been him, because I loved him. I thought he was a wonderful man. But his conversation with us was a turning point. We saw it for what it was.
Okay. So I think you were baptized at some point?
Yeah, August 1986.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
that was great.
By baptism, you mean you got dunked in water?
Yeah.
Signifying,
we got dunked in water.
Signifying the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus.
That's right. Your old self goes down into the water, down into that watery grave, and your new self comes up. The new has been born.
Right.
And then that new person has to learn to live a completely different way.
Right.
In the power of Jesus.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of difference between being a good person and believing the right things and the experience of grace, having been saved and your sin forgiven.
Yeah.
It's
there are times when I'm sure you must experience this sometimes. There are times when I look at church and I ask myself, why do I do it? Because it can be really difficult sometimes. But then Jesus comes to mind, and I think, yeah, that's why I do it, because these are his people and I'm his person. So it's because of him. Yeah.
And churches are always a minefield. You're walking. I've been a pastor for 52 years.
Yeah.
52 years, and I have found that churches are minefields, and you can get blown up.
You can. It can happen. But there was one period where I couldn't go to church because I'd been so badly hurt. And it was over 2 years. But Kent, I knew I would go to church again. I just knew, because Jesus wouldn't let me alone. He wouldn't leave me alone. And I just knew there was going to come a point where that's going to be mended and I'm going to be in church again. And lo and behold, here I am in church again. It's pretty good. Very wonderful.
Okay. Yeah, it's Christianity in America, particularly in this era, Michael, is the most difficult I've ever seen, and seen so many people walk away unhappily, but in a way it might be good for churches. It's sort of, it can be good. Now, so I see here that it says, you dawned on me one day that another obstacle arose, and you finally understood grace.
You see, John gave us a New Testament, the NIV, and he told us to read Romans 1-8.
Yeah.
And he said, don't look up any commentaries. Don't listen to anybody telling you what it means. Just read it. And we read it. And when we got to Romans 8 verse 1, Oh, wow. That was grace just jumping off the page. And then Romans 5, verse 1, about having peace with God. And we realized that we didn't have peace with God, that the problem we had was we were burdened with condemnation because we weren't good enough. But Romans 8:1 says that for those who are in Christ, there is no condemnation. Oh, and we wanted that.
Oh, yes.
We so wanted that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any kind of religion or Christianity that depends upon what you do.
Yeah.
What you do is bound to lead to misery.
Yeah.
And then you discover, oh, it's not even what I have to believe or what I do or where I join, but by the power of the Holy Spirit, you receive forgiveness. Forgiveness is the core, I think, Michael.
It is the core. And you know, when the penny dropped for me, when I realized what this was, I can picture it in my mind now, where I was, where I stood, John standing in front of me. And I said to John, this can't be right because I'm not worthy. And he said to me, no, you're not. And you're never going to be. You have to receive the gift of salvation.
Right.
And what a moment that was.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just amazing. It's hard to communicate to people sometimes what grace and peace and forgiveness is.
Yeah.
But that's the core of what happens, and it's the work of God. So you have down here, we've only got about 7 minutes left for this first program, but
Okay.
so your family said, when your family heard about it, it says, Michael has gone religious. as one cousin put it, you say.
He said to me, I shook his hand. I met him in the street and I shook his hand and he looked at me and he said, oh, you've gone all religious. And I said, no, I haven't. I just walked away from a religion.
Yeah.
And now I've joined Jesus.
Right.
You know? Yeah. Yeah.
Did you remain friends with some of the Mormon people that you had gone to church with?
Yes, I mean, they don't, in my experience anyway, they don't shun. And I have Mormon neighbors just a couple of streets away, and we do stop and chat. And I've spoken to others, and the strange thing is that they've become more liberal than you and I would ever be happy being. And they've become ecumenical and interfaith. And they asked me if I'm doing that, and I said, well, no, I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus. You can't mix that with other religions. And it's really strange to me because back in the day, they were the conservative ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, so one of the things you say here, well, now, there's a story there. Ask me about Gerald.
Gerald. Back in the day, when you leave the Mormon Church, they would excommunicate you. Yeah. And Gerald was on the panel that excommunicated me. And many years later, I got a call from the Reach Out Trust office saying that I should call Gerald. So I called Gerald, and he wanted to tell me he'd become a Christian. And we chatted about this. And I said to him, well, what started this journey for you then? And he said, well, do you remember when we excommunicated you and you stood and bore your testimony? And Kent, I had no theology then. I simply told him that Jesus loved me. And he said, ever since then, Jesus wouldn't leave me alone. You reminded me of what I had learned in the Christian Sunday school when I was a boy. So I like to share that story to encourage Sunday school teachers. And Gerald, because of my simple testimony, left the Mormon Church and went back to his Christian roots. He's a church leader now, not far from where I live.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Wow. Okay, Michael. So, So how did you find a church at this point? What did you do now?
We went to John's church. We were there for about 11 years.
What church was it? What denomination?
It was one of the new churches. It was a Restorationist church, in fact.
A Restoration church. I don't know what that is.
It's a church that, well, put it this way, they do like the New Apostolic Reformation because they believe in the restoration of apostles and prophets. So it appealed to us because of our Mormon background. But after about 11 years, we walked away from that because we didn't like all the charismaticism, and it became extreme. And then we became more conservative and went to Baptist churches.
Okay. All right. So right now you're a member of a church someplace?
Yeah, we go to a church not far from where we live. It used to be a Brethren church.
A Brethren church?
Yeah, it used to be a Brethren church. So the teaching there is really good, and so that you get well fed on a Sunday morning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You never felt called into pastoral ministry? Because you seem very pastoral to me.
Well, I was on church leadership for a number of years. I was an elder in a church that we were going to. So I saw that side of it. And I'd been a leader in the Mormon Church as well. And being in leadership in a Christian church is a really tough business. And I wish people would understand how hard it is for leaders. And when I preach about leadership, I say to people, if you want good leaders, you've got to be good followers. And people don't like that. Churches today, they don't mind being managed, but they don't like being led.
Yes.
So yeah. I don't think the pastoral ministry is for me. I'm a teacher. I teach.
Yeah. My sermon, Michael, last Sunday, we were talking about in Luke, an unworthy servant. Unworthy servants. Yeah. And pastors have to understand that they are unworthy servants.
Yeah.
And I told them a story. I have 3 friends who have been pastors for a long time and now are out of it and don't want to go back to being a pastor again.
Yeah. I understand. I have such admiration for people who pastor. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. It's a tremendous challenge. But in the next program, we're going to talk about what you're doing now.
All right.
The ministry. I kept seeing the initials RT.
Yeah.
RT, and I didn't know what that was, and my wife asked, "What is this RT?" And I said, "No, that's Michael Thomas's ministry." And
Reach Out Trust. It's Reach Out Trust.
Yes, and so that's what we're going to be talking about coming up next time. So be looking for the next program, program 2 with Michael Thomas in South Wales, and we'll find out the ministry that he's engaged in and some of the personal struggles he's gone through in his life. Until then, so long.